welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really cracking open a cornerstone of Western thought Stoicism.
That's right.
But maybe not starting where you'd expect. We're not jumping straight to, Seneca or Marcus Aurelius.
No, we're actually looking at the bridge figures first. The philosophical diplomats, you could say.
Exactly. The ones who took this, let's be honest, pretty demanding Greek philosophy and made it work for Rome. For that incredibly practical, public-focused, power-driven Roman culture.
Which is quite a feat when you think about it. So our mission today is to dive deep into what's called the Middle Stoa.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at Panaetius of Rhodes and his student Posidonius. These two are absolutely crucial.
They're the ones who sort of engineered Stoicism's Roman conquest.
You could put it that way, yeah. They managed the transition from the really dense theoretical stuff of someone like Chrysippus in Athens.
The early Stoa.
It's the early Stoa, exactly. To the practical how-to-live guide that Roman emperors and senators ended up embracing centuries later. They're kind of the unsung heroes, the reason Stoicism as we know it even survived.
Okay, so it's an adaptation story, a kind of philosophical upgrade to fit a new environment. But the first thing I think we have to grapple with, based on the sources, is this huge historical irony.
Oh, it's massive. It's maybe one of the biggest tragedies in the history of philosophy.
How so?
Well, the early Stoics, particularly Chrysippus, often called the second founder of Stoicism, they were incredibly prolific.
Wrote a lot.
A ton. Diogenes Laertius lists over 700 books just for Chrysippus. 700.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. Not a single one of those books survives intact today.
Not one.
Not one. And not just Chrysippus. No complete text from the entire early or middle Stoa has made it. Zero.
It's devastating, actually. All that work, just gone.
It is. We have titles. We know they wrote extensively, but the original foundation, mostly missing.
So what do we have then? How do we even know about Panaetius and Posidonius?
Fragments, quotations. And here's the twist. Often, they're preserved by later writers who were actually hostile to Stoicism.
Like who?
The famous physician Galen is a prime example. He really disliked Stoic ideas about the soul and emotions, thought they were just wrong.
Okay.
But to argue against them, he had to quote them. So he quotes Chrysippus and Posidonius extensively, just so he can then try to tear their arguments down.
So our main source is an opponent. That's quite something.
He's our, involuntary librarian. It's ironic, but crucial. And this massive loss really highlights why the later Roman Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, became so famous. Their works did survive.
They are the legacy, the end result of what the Middle Stoa started.
Precisely. They're what we have left, thanks to that successful reframing by Panaetius and Posidonius.
And it seems like the whole philosophy right from the start was about turning disaster into something else. You mentioned Zeno, the founder. His story starts with a shipwreck.
Literally. Zeno of Cyprus, around 300 BC. He was a merchant's son, doing business, sailing near Athens.
And boom, ship goes down.
Ship goes down off the coast. He makes it to Athens, stranded. But instead of despairing, he decides to, check out the local intellectual scene.
As you do after a shipwreck.
Apparently. The story goes, he walks into a bookseller's shop and asks, "Where can I find men like Socrates?"
He was already thinking philosophically then.
Seems so. And just then, by sheer chance, the bookseller points to Crates the Cynic walking past and says basically, "Follow that guy."
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Zeno starts studying, becomes a philosopher instead of a merchant, and eventually founds his own school in the painted Stoa, the Stoa Poikile. That's where the name Stoicism comes from.
And he had that amazing quote about this shipwreck, didn't he?
Yes. Looking back, he said, "I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered shipwreck."
That just sums it all up, doesn't it? External disaster becomes internal opportunity. It's not the lost cargo, it's the character you build.
That's the absolute core Stoic insight right from the beginning. So Zeno's shipwreck shows how character can be forged by adversity. But, how do you take that philosophy born out of Greek thought and make it stick in Rome, generation after generation? That's the job of the Middle Stoa.
And that brings us squarely to Panaetius of Rhodes. Roughly 185 to 109 BC. You called him the connector.
Or the great ambassador, yeah. His life really mirrored this power shift from Greece to Rome, and he was probably the key figure in weaving Stoicism into the Roman fabric.
Now, Stoicism had been introduced earlier, right? By Crates of Melis?
Briefly, yes. Crates came on a diplomatic mission in 155 BC, broke his leg, stayed longer than planned, and gave some lectures, so there was some awareness.
But Panaetius built the real bridge.
He did. His genius was seeing that the Roman aristocracy, these powerful men focused on duty, law, military command, running an empire, they weren't going to buy into the really radical, abstract parts of early Stoicism.
Okay, so what did he downplay or change?
Right.
What parts of early Stoicism were seen as, well, unsuitable for Rome?
Well, the early Stoa, especially under Chrysippus, was obsessed with building this huge, coherent system logic, physics, ethics, all interconnected.
A grand theory of everything.
Pretty much. Panaetius seems to have looked at that and thought, Rome doesn't need all this. So he deliberately minimized the complex Stoic physics, especially the idea of ekpyrosis.
Which is?
The idea that the universe is periodically destroyed in a great fire and then reborn exactly the same over and over again.
Right. Maybe not the most practical idea for a Roman senator worrying about the grain supply.
Probably not. And on the logic side, he ditched the complex paradoxes the early guys loved.
Like the liar paradox. If I say, I'm lying, am I telling the truth? That kind of thing.
Exactly. Intellectually stimulating, maybe, but totally useless if you're trying to decide whether to declare war. Panaetius zeroed in on ethics, practical applications.
So less, what is the universe? And more, what's my duty right here, right now?
Precisely. And this focus allowed him to connect with the Scipionic Circle.
Which was a big deal. Some of the major players in Rome there, like Scipio Africanus the Younger.
Hugely influential figures. Panaetius became their advisor, their philosophical guide. The sources really show this is when Stoicism shifts from being this niche academic thing to a practical guide for public life, for leadership.
And his big work on duties, we have that through Cicero, right?
Yes, Cicero adapted it heavily in his De Officiis, and it's all about practical ethics, how to behave in office, relations with friends, the difference between what's morally right, honestum, and what's just convenient, utile.
That mix of ethics and political advice that made it acceptable, even desirable, for the Roman elite.
It showed that philosophy wasn't just abstract speculation, it was training for power. In Rome at that time, the influential thinkers were often scholars, writers, and counselors to powerful people. Being stuck in just one narrow philosophical school was starting to look, well, a bit old-fashioned.
And after Panaetius comes his student, Posidonius.
Posidonius, roughly 135 to 51 BC, he takes this influence and just expands it massively. He becomes this towering intellectual figure, a true polymath.
Yeah, he wasn't just a philosopher. He was into science, geography, history.
Everything. He wrote in Greek, but his audience and focus were squarely on the Roman world.
His range was incredible. Didn't he write like 5 books just on divination?
5 books, yes. The Stoics firmly believed divination was real and rational, and Posidonius laid out the arguments, which Cicero later used extensively in De Divinatione.
And he did science too, calculating the Earth's circumference.
He did. He was a bit off, but he tackled it. He wrote about ocean tides, cosmology. His scholarship was just immense.
So much so that even people who disliked Stoicism had to engage with him, like Galen again.
Exactly. As we said, Galen wasn't a fan, but the sources show he quotes Posidonius a lot in works like On the Doctrines of Hippocrates and Plato. It just shows that if you wanted to discuss almost any field of knowledge back then, you had to deal with Posidonius.
He made Stoicism a truly comprehensive worldview.
He really did. He gave it the intellectual weight to compete with other schools like skepticism or Epicureanism. So Panaetius and Posidonius, these middle Stoics, they acted as interpreters. They made it not just okay, but actually prestigious for a Roman aristocrat to embrace this Greek philosophy.
Okay, so moving into how this played out in Rome itself, this blend, this adaptation, it quickly turned Stoicism from a complex academic subject into something you could do.
Right. The focus shifts dramatically. It's less about building a perfect theoretical system and more about what scholars later called a lived, concrete exercise.
It's about practice.
It really is. Compare the early Stoics, obsessed with logic and system building, to someone like Epictetus centuries later. He was ruthlessly practical.
He gave people a kind of roadmap for living, right? The 3 disciplines.
Exactly. That's his framework, which is really a distillation of Stoic ethics made possible by the middle Stoa's groundwork. You've got mastering desires, the discipline of desire, performing your duties, the discipline of action, and crucially, thinking clearly, the discipline of assent.
So it's less about the grand cosmos and more about your internal response to whatever life throws at you.
Spot on. And this focus on immediate practicality allowed a distinct Roman flavor of philosophy to emerge. Look at Quintus Sextius.
He founded a specifically Roman school around the time of Julius Caesar.
He did. And he really embodied that Roman seriousness, gravitas. He famously turned down a seat in the Senate offered by Caesar himself. He chose philosophy instead, arguing that pursuing wisdom was actually the higher form of public service.
That's a statement. And Seneca really admired him, didn't he? Particularly his writing style.
Yeah, Seneca found a lot of Greek philosophy, a bit. Well, he used words like flaccid and effeminate, maybe a bit harsh, but...
Reflects a Roman perspective, perhaps?
Perhaps. But he praised Sextius for using tough, vigorous Roman language to express these Greek ethical ideas. It suggests that for Stoicism to really land in Rome, it had to sound Roman, feel Roman, it had to connect with Virtus, that core Roman value of manliness, courage, duty.
And Seneca loved the military analogies Sextius used, like the infantry hollow square.
Oh, that's a fantastic image. Seneca, despite his own health issues, meaning he avoided military life, clearly admired that martial spirit.
So what's the hollow square analogy about?
It's a defensive formation. Soldiers form a square, spears facing out on all sides to defend against cavalry attacks from any direction. Sextius used it as a metaphor for how a virtuous person should resist evil or temptation. Constant vigilance, disciplined resistance, active moral readiness on all fronts.
That's a powerful image of moral effort as combat. Very Roman.
Very Roman indeed. And it's the successful adaptation making Stoicism practical, vigorous, Roman that paved the way for the big three whose works we still have.
Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius.
And their lives couldn't be more different, which really shows the philosophy's reach.
Right. You've got Seneca, wealthy, powerful, tutor to Nero, political insider, forced suicide, saw the absolute worst of imperial power.
Then Epictetus, born a slave, lamed by his master, eventually freed, but then banished from Rome, sets up a simple school, calls it a hospital for souls, total opposite end of the social spectrum.
And finally, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, using Stoicism to manage not just personal grief, but the immense pressures of ruling an empire during war and plague.
Slave, minister, emperor. The fact that Stoicism worked for all three is a testament to the practical foundation laid by Panaetius and Posidonius.
Okay, let's dig into the core doctrines themselves, the practical stuff that resonated in Rome. We have to start with the big one.
Yeah.
The doctrine of indifference. Everyone thinks they know it, but it's pretty radical.
It is radical, absolutely. And it caused a lot of debate, especially with Panaetius's modifications. The fundamental Stoic claim is this: virtue, moral goodness, is the only thing that's truly good.
And vice, moral badness, is the only thing truly bad.
Correct. Everything else, health, sickness, wealth, poverty, pleasure, pain, reputation, all of it is technically indifferent. Morally neutral.
Okay, but hold on. That sounds counterintuitive. Were they really saying health isn't better than being sick? Or having food isn't better than starving? That just sounds like denial. Panaetius must have faced pushback on this.
Huge pushback. Critics accused him of watering down Stoicism, of being a sellout. This is where his crucial nuance comes in, the idea of preferred indifference.
Preferred indifference. Okay, what does that mean?
It means Stoics aren't idiots. They know humans naturally prefer health to sickness, wealth to poverty. These things have value, they make life easier, more comfortable, they are preferred.
So you can choose health over sickness.
Of course. You select them, you use them if you can. But, and this is the absolute key point Panaetius hammered home for the Romans, they do not determine your happiness. They don't touch your core moral worth.
So losing your health is bad in a practical sense, but it doesn't make you morally worse. It doesn't diminish your capacity for virtue.
Exactly. Your happiness, your true well-being, eudaimonia, depends solely on your virtue, on the quality of your choices and judgments, not on external circumstances.
And the ultimate example of this is the Stoic sage, the ideal wise person.
Right. The sage is the theoretical ideal who can achieve happiness even in the worst possible conditions, say, being tortured on the rack. Because their happiness comes entirely from the virtuosic exercise of their agency, as the sources put it, from knowing they are reasoning and acting rightly.
But you can see the tension there, right? The early Stoa says only virtue matters. Full stop. Panaetius introduces these preferred things. Critics would say he's muddying the waters, making it seem like the goal is just to be good at getting convenient stuff, not just being virtuous.
That's precisely the tension. That balancing act between radical virtue and the demands of practical Roman life is what makes the Middle Stoa and figures like Panaetius so interesting. And this leads directly into Epictetus's most famous teaching, the dichotomy of control.
What's in our control, what's not?
The absolute core of his practical ethics, and it has deep Socratic roots. Epictetus says we only have complete control over our inner world, our judgments, our choices, our desires, our aversions, basically our volition, what he calls prohairesis.
Our will, our faculty of choice.
Yes. Everything else, our body, our health, our possessions, our reputation, what other people think, external events, all of that is ultimately outside our direct control.
Okay, I have to push back again here, thinking about Epictetus himself.
Yeah.
He was a slave. His owner broke his leg. How can you say his body or external events were outside his control in a meaningful way? Wasn't his prohairesis, his will, impacted by that extreme suffering? Isn't that just denial again?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And the Stoic answer is profoundly challenging and, again, very Socratic. They insist that the core faculty of judgment, the prohairesis, remains autonomous. Your body can be imprisoned, tortured, killed, your property taken, your name slandered. But the assent you give to a value judgment about those events, that remains yours alone.
So the pain is real, the loss is real. But whether I judge that pain or loss as catastrophic or the end of my happiness, that judgment is up to me.
That's the claim. Epictetus hammers this relentlessly. Your prohairesis is unimpeded, unconstrained, unhindered. Not even Zeus can compel your assent against your will. It's radically internal.
And the why behind this is practical too, right? If your happiness depends on things you don't control.
You're setting yourself up for constant frustration, disappointment, and misery. It makes your well-being incredibly vulnerable. The Stoic move, refined and popularized through the Middle Stoa's ethical focus, is to relocate your sense of self and value entirely within the sphere of your prohairesis. Find your good there, and you find a source of strength that external events can't touch.
This internal focus naturally leads to how they dealt with emotions, the pathy. They saw the philosopher as a kind of doctor for the soul.
Very much so. Epictetus literally called his school a hospital. For the Stoics, emotions aren't just feelings that happen to us. They're the result of judgments we make.
Bad judgments, specifically.
Usually, yes. Strong emotions like fear, anger, intense craving, they arise from mistaken beliefs about what's good or bad. Believing something external is terribly bad when it's actually indifferent, or incredibly good when it's only preferred. These value judgments trigger the emotional turmoil.
But Seneca added a really important layer here, didn't he? The first movements. That seems crucial for practical application.
Absolutely crucial. This shows the sophistication of Stoic psychology. Seneca distinguished between full-blown emotions and these initial involuntary physical reactions, propathe.
Like jumping when you hear a loud noise.
Yeah.
Or your heart racing, feeling a flush of nervousness.
Exactly. That initial shock, the racing heart, the sudden tension, Seneca says those are natural physiological responses. They're unavoidable, like a reflex. You can't stop them.
But that's not the emotion yet.
Not in the full Stoic sense, no. It only becomes an emotion like fear or anger if your mind then assents to an underlying value judgment.
Can you give an example?
Sure, the loud noise makes you jump. That's the first movement. Involuntary. If your mind then immediately judges, that noise means terrible danger, I need to panic, and you assent to that thought, then the physiological response turns into the full emotion of fear. But if you recognize the noise, assess it rationally, oh, just a car backfiring, and withhold assent from the terrible danger judgment, the initial jolt fades without becoming full-blown panic.
I see. So you can't control the initial flinch, but you can control the secondary judgment that turns it into a disruptive emotion.
That's the idea. And this distinction is why Seneca argued so strongly that anger is never necessary or helpful.
Why anger specifically?
Because anger is fundamentally based on the judgment that you've been wronged, and that this wrong demands an intense, overwhelming response. Seneca thought it was always better to address the situation calmly, acting from a sense of duty or justice, rather than letting anger take over.
He had that analogy about running too fast.
Yes. He said anger is like starting to run too fast downhill. Once you've built up that momentum, the adrenaline, the physical arousal, you lose control. You just have to wait until it burns itself out. Acting from reasoned duty, however, is a controlled, purposeful action that achieves the goal without the destructive side effects of rage.
Okay, so how did they train themselves to manage these judgments and reactions? They had specific techniques, right? Like premeditatio malorum.
Negative visualization, yes. This is a core Stoic practice, though it sounds grim. It involves deliberately thinking about things you don't want to happen, losing possessions, getting sick. even the death of a loved one, and imagining them as if they are already happening.
Why would you do that? Isn't that just making yourself miserable?
The goal isn't misery, it's inoculation. It's about loosening your attachment to things that are, by their nature, temporary and outside your ultimate control. Epictetus gives that stark advice. Practice with small things first, like imagining your favorite cup is broken. Remind yourself it's just a cup.
And then scale up.
Then scale up, even to the loss of people you care about. Remind yourself they are mortal. By mentally rehearsing loss, the Stoics believed, you reduce the shock and devastation when it inevitably occurs. You've already faced it in your mind. It softens the blow.
That's intense. What about the other technique, the view from above? Marcus Aurelius used that one a lot.
Yes, the cosmological perspective. This involves imagining yourself looking down on the earth from a great height, seeing everything from a vast cosmic viewpoint.
What's the purpose of that?
To gain perspective, to see how small your own problems, anxieties, and ambitions are in the grand scheme of things. Marcus Aurelius wrote about seeing the whole gamut of human life spread out below, the short lifespans, the tiny patches of land people fight over.
What a tiny part of the boundless abyss of time has been allotted to each of us, he wrote.
Exactly. It puts things in perspective. The goal is to cultivate a sense of distance and equanimity, recognizing the relative insignificance of many of the things that cause us stress and turmoil. Now, all this internal training, this focus on judgment and perspective, which really defined the Roman Stoa, it wasn't meant to lead to withdrawal from the world. Not at all. The adaptation Panaetius started required applying this philosophy directly in public life. That's the discipline of action.
Right, the second of Epictetus's three themes. The Stoic ideal wasn't the hermit, it was the engaged citizen. It demanded participation.
Absolutely. The discipline of action is about fulfilling your roles as a parent, a child, a citizen, a professional according to reason and justice. Stoicism became, in many ways, the ideal training for a Roman administrator or leader. You had a duty to serve the community.
But there seems to be some tension here, too, within Roman Stoicism itself. You mentioned Dio earlier, the courtier, the public figure.
Right. Dio Chrysostom very much engaged in public life, advising emperors, a kind of ancient media personality.
But then you have Epictetus, who seemed to actively shun fame in public life. He taught that ambition was an artificial desire that brought no real satisfaction.
True. It shows the different ways the call to duty could be interpreted. For Dio, duty meant engaging directly with power and public affairs. For Epictetus, perhaps influenced by his banishment, duty focused more on teaching and perfecting one's own moral character, seeing that as the best contribution. But both were fundamentally concerned with action based on principle.
And the ultimate, maybe tragic embodiment of Stoic virtue in Roman politics has to be Cato the Younger.
Oh, absolutely. Cato is the figure most associated with that uncompromising Stoic commitment to principle in the political arena. He was deeply influenced by the Middle Stoics, by Panaetius's emphasis on duty.
The sources describe him as kind, but incredibly tough, a paragon of political virtue.
He was known for his strict adherence to the old Republican laws and traditions, and his relentless opposition to Julius Caesar, whom he saw as a threat to the Republic.
And his commitment was so absolute, it led him to take his own life.
Yes, after Caesar defeated the Republican forces at the Battle of Thapsus, Cato chose suicide rather than submit to Caesar's rule or accept a pardon. It was seen as the ultimate Stoic act, choosing adherence to principle over life itself, a martyr's fate, really, cementing that image of the stern, unbending Stoic statesman.
This focus on principle also fed into the Roman and Stoic emphasis on law and order as essential for a functioning society. You mentioned Machiavelli's analysis of Rome.
Right. Machiavelli, looking back centuries later, really understood the practical wisdom in some Roman institutions, which resonates with Stoic ideals of rational governance.
You talked about the importance of having legal channels for public anger, like the tribunes.
Exactly. Machiavelli argued that a stable state needs formal, legal ways for people to express grievances, especially against powerful figures. The tribune system in Rome allowed commoners to bring accusations and vent their anger through official channels.
Why is that so important?
Because if there's no legal outlet, that anger festers and eventually erupts into irregular violence, riots, conspiracies, private vendettas. That destroys social order. The Stoic emphasis on reason, order, and respect for law aligns perfectly with this need for stable, predictable institutions.
And the flip side is the danger of unchecked power. Machiavelli used the example of the decemvirs in Rome.
Yes, the 10 men given absolute authority to write down the laws. It was a disaster. Machiavelli's observation was chillingly accurate. Absolute authority will corrupt the people and obtain for itself friends and partisans. Unchecked power breeds tyranny and destroys the very fabric of law and reason that the Stoics valued.
So for the Stoic in public life, maintaining lawful order and resisting arbitrary power were key duties. And to face these challenges, they needed that inner resilience we talked about. Which brings us back to Seneca and his view on adversity.
Yes, Seneca really drove home this idea of adversity as training. It wasn't just something to be endured, it should be welcomed.
Welcomed? That sounds tough.
It is. He used that analogy of the wrestler. A good wrestler needs strong opponents to stay sharp. If they only fight weaker ones, their skill decays. Similarly, Seneca argued, we need difficulties to develop virtues like courage, patience, and resilience.
So hardship is actually good for you.
In a sense, yes, it's an opportunity. He even used a military analogy. God, or nature, tests the best soldiers with the toughest assignments. So facing adversity is actually a sign that you're considered worthy, that you have the potential for virtue.
It's a mark of having a virtuous character.
Right. And conversely, Seneca saw constant ease, unending wealth and luxury as the real misfortune.
Why? Because it makes you soft.
Exactly. Complacent, lazy, ungrateful, always wanting more. Prosperity removes the stimulus for effort. Adversity forces you to dig deep, to exercise your resilience, to prove your character. It's necessary training for the Stoic moral athlete.
So when we look back, the legacy initiated by Panaetius and Posidonius, by the Middle Stoa, it's immense. They created this practical, comprehensive system for ethical living that connected with Roman values and ensured Stoicism's survival and influence for centuries.
It's truly remarkable. By making it practical, by linking it to civic duty and effective living, they guaranteed it wouldn't just fade away as a purely Greek philosophical school. Its influence stretches right down to modern times.
You can really see echoes, can't you? You mentioned the Serenity Prayer earlier.
It's almost perfect, concise summary of Epictetus's dichotomy of control, isn't it? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's accepting what's not in our control. The courage to change the things I can. That's focusing on our choices, our actions, our prohairesis, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the core philosophical task.
It's amazing how direct that connection is, and also connections to modern psychology, like Viktor Frankl's logotherapy.
Absolutely. Frankl, writing after his experiences in Nazi concentration camps, developed ideas that resonate strongly with Stoicism. His emphasis on finding meaning, even in extreme suffering, the idea that your attitude towards suffering is a freedom that cannot be taken away.
That sounds incredibly Stoic, like the sage finding happiness on the rack.
It does. Frankl's insight that our core freedom lies in choosing our response to conditions, that echoes the Stoic focus on the invincible prohairesis. Concepts in logotherapy like paradoxical intention, deliberately trying to do or wish for the thing you fear. As a way to overcome anticipatory anxiety, you can see parallels with Stoic psychological techniques aimed at mastering irrational fear.
It shows the enduring power of focusing on that internal citadel, the part of you that external events can't ultimately conquer. That's the gift of the Stoics.
It truly is. That internal autonomy is their central legacy.
Okay, so let's end with that central tension we've touched on, the one created by the Middle Stoa's successful adaptation, the bridge between Athens and Rome.
Right. The early Stoa was radical. Virtue is the only good. Happiness is possible even in extreme suffering, relying solely on inner virtue.
But the Roman version, shaped by Panaetius and Posidonius, embraced duty, public action, and those preferred indifference, health, reputation, even effective leadership. These things clearly have external value.
They do. So the final question, the provocative thought maybe, is this. Did that adaptation, the very thing that made Stoicism survive and conquer Rome, fundamentally change it?
Meaning, did focusing on practical success, on achieving those preferred external goods like a stable society or personal reputation, risk turning virtue into just a means to an end?
Instead of virtue being its own reward, sufficient in itself, regardless of outcome, did the Roman emphasis on effectiveness subtly shift the focus, making virtue valuable because it led to happiness or social approval, rather than being intrinsically valuable on its own?
That's the knife edge, isn't it? The fascinating tightrope that the Stoics who conquered Rome had to walk, making philosophy work in the real world without losing its soul.